distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, may I please ask you to kindly take your seats so that we can first of all see how many people are in the room, but then so that we can start with the opening of the COP. Again, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, may I please ask you to kindly take your seats in order for us to begin with the opening ceremony for the COP26. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, may I please ask you to kindly take your seats? The COP president is there on their way.
Good morning to everybody. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to declare open the 26th session of the Conference of the Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Dear delegates, after 2 years, it is indeed a pleasure to see you all in person. However, the past 2 years has been difficult. Some of us lost family, friends, and colleagues. Please join me for a minute of silence in remembrance of the many lives lost around the world during the coronavirus pandemic. As we adjust to life with COVID-19, let me remind everyone of the COVID protocols in place to keep you safe and healthy during the conference. Please maintain 1 meter distance from the participants, and participants must wear face coverings except when eating, drinking, sitting in office spaces or meeting, sitting to perform negotiations, or are medically exempt. As hygiene crew will enter promptly at the end of our allotted time to disinfect all surfaces before the next meeting begins. We ask for your cooperation to exit the session promptly so that the cleaning can begin. Excelencias, distinguidos,
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends, 2 years after the last time we met with this pandemic, which we had not experienced for centuries, is forcing us to take care of ourselves. And I'm delighted that we can actually meet in person today. Today, we are passing on the presidency of the COP, the longest presidency of the process. We accepted to take over the presidency of the COP on behalf of Latin America and the Caribbean region. COP25 took place in complicated circumstances, and Chile, with conviction, gave a step forward, stepped up when others were stepping back. I would like to acknowledge the bravery, the courage of Sebastián Piñera, the president, who took that brave decision and stayed unwavering, committed to this endeavor, despite all the difficulties we had to face in these years of our presidency. As president of COP25, Chile did everything it could to lead the process and to do so with transparency, inclusively and ambitiously. This process is a process of the parties. It being understood that the final outcome is the responsibility of the consensus of each and every one. As president, I, with my team, drove forward the integrity for us to implement the Paris Agreement. We know that to tackle climate change calls for cross-cutting transformation of our modes of development. That is why, as the presidency, we convened COP25, the finance ministers, the ministers for energy, the ministers for science, the ministers for transport, and the ministers for agriculture, to drive forward this multi-sectoral transformative change to combat climate change. The first decision of COP25 we took together, and we recognized that science was non-negotiable. It's the basis on which we need to take our decisions to bring about this transformation. And it was unprecedented, and we took on board the oceans in the COP process. Our understanding is that the negotiations of the parties are the key to achieve a successful process. But we also know that the inclusion of non-state actors, civil society, private sector, as a driver for innovation and technological change, need to be taken into account. The sub-regional governments need to be taken on board so that we can implement our decisions regionally, as well as the financial institutions. Only by bringing all these people on board will we achieve the ambition we want at the speed, the pace we need also. At COP25, we said this clearly. It is time for us to act. That is why, together, we renewed the mandate of the champions, and we launched the Global Ambitious Alliance for Carbon Neutrality, which, thanks to the joint work of the champions of Chile and the United Kingdom, and thanks to the Race to Zero, we have been able to exponentially increase the involvement of NGOs, non-state actors, so that everybody can be taken on, bring about this transformative change. Over 7,000 institutions have went to that COP, including and $90 trillion worth of commitment. We have committed ourselves to act by 2050 with specific actions that are science-based. As president of the COP, we
al nivel de la mitigación. Por eso, juntos renovamos el WIM, lanzamos el Santiago Network para la asistencia técnica a la adaptación y junto con la presidencia entrante y los champions impulsamos la campaña Race to Resilience, que tiene por objetivo concreto disminuir la vulnerabilidad frente al cambio climático de más de 4 billones de personas al año 2030. Poner a las personas en el centro debe ser nuestra meta siempre. Por eso la implementación del plan de género es fundamental para una acción climática justa e inclusiva, que no profundice las brechas y desigualdades ya existentes. Nada de lo avanzado en la COP25 habría sido posible sin el apoyo, la convicción y el trabajo de muchísimas personas a las que hoy quiero agradecer. Gracias especialmente a España y en particular a su presidente Pedro Sánchez y su ministra de Transición Ecológica, Teresa Rivera. Fue su profundo compromiso con la urgencia del cambio climático, el multilateralismo y la solidaridad entre países, lo que permitió que la COP25 pudiese realizarse el año 2019. Más allá de los colores políticos de los gobiernos de turno, para nosotros, el pueblo español y el gobierno de Pedro Sánchez ha sido nuestro aliado, nuestro hermano en la COP25 y en la lucha contra el cambio climático. Gracias. Gracias a Patricia Espinosa, mujer latinoamericana, una gran líder y muy querida amiga. Secretaria ejecutiva de la Convención Marco de Naciones Unidas. Su consejo y apoyo, y el de todo el equipo del secretariado, así como también el del secretario general Antonio Gutiérrez, que ha sido clave para dar continuidad al proceso y mantener el momentum aún en los difíciles tiempos de la pandemia. Para mí fue un honor haber ejercido durante estos años la presidencia a nombre de mi país. Un honor largo, un gran honor. Quiero agradecer a todos los equipos de los diferentes ministerios de Chile y a los equipos negociadores que se sumaron a esta desafiante labor con convicción, entusiasmo y gran profesionalismo. A los miembros del Buró, a la delegación de Chile y a la de todos los países, en especial de los más vulnerables, que con tanto esfuerzo viajan, muchas veces desde enormes distancias, para participar de este proceso, que debe ser transformador. Y a las miles de personas que desde nuestros países contribuyen para impulsar los cambios. Quiero decirles a todos ustedes que sí valió la pena. Contarles también que la presidencia de la COP permitió a Chile, en momentos muy complejos de fuerte polarización política y social, generar un consenso transversal en nuestro país para construir, reconociendo lo avanzado, y fortalecer una acción climática ambiciosa como política de Estado que trascienda los gobiernos de turnos. Cumpliendo lo establecido en el Acuerdo de París, en Chile, trabajando conjuntamente con la ciencia, logramos aprobar unánimemente en el Senado la Ley Marco de Cambio Climático, que establece la meta de carbono neutralidad y resiliencia a más tardar el 2050, como lo pide la ciencia. Presentar el 2020 nuestra NDC actualizada con ambición en línea con la carbono neutralidad. Desarrollar el Atlas de Riesgo Climático a nivel comunal para todo el territorio nacional, instrumento clave para la adaptación. Impulsar un proceso de descarbonización, estableciendo el cierre inmediato de las primeras plantas a carbón apenas asumimos la presidencia el año 2019 y el cierre al año 2025 del 65% de todas las centrales a carbón en Chile. Y hoy, presentar en esta COP26 nuestra estrategia climática de largo plazo, con límites de emisiones vinculantes para todos los sectores emisores de nuestra economía y más de 400 medidas multisectoriales concretas en un camino claro para alcanzar la carbono neutralidad y resiliencia de nuestro país. Sin duda, son logros importantes. Sin embargo, sabemos que aún nos queda mucho por avanzar. En Chile y en el mundo entero estamos sintiendo con fuerza los efectos del cambio climático. La ciudadanía espera mucho de los líderes en la COP. Nuestra generación no va a detener hoy el cambio climático, pero sí debe hacer con urgencia el cambio de rumbo que necesitamos para detenerlo. Son los jóvenes a quienes sumamos en el proceso de negociación, los que con su fuerza, capacidad de innovación y de trabajar horizontalmente pueden ayudarnos a generar los consensos requeridos para lograr el desarrollo sustentable que todos anhelamos. Quiero agradecer al Reino Unido, con quien trabajamos estrechamente estos 2 años, al presidente entrante, Alok Sharma, quien se ha abocado en lograr el éxito de este proceso, y a todo su equipo, no solo por liderar la COP26, sino por haber hecho todos los esfuerzos por albergar una COP presencial y segura, pese a todas las restricciones sanitarias que impone el COVID. Sabemos que el éxito de esta COP26 se va a evaluar principalmente en 3 áreas: ambición, finanzas y reglas. Hoy tenemos una gran brecha de ambición. El Acuerdo de París establece 2 instrumentos mandatorios para enfrentar el cambio climático: presentar NDCs más ambiciosas y estrategias climáticas de largo plazo. Esos son los 2 instrumentos concretos que todos los países debemos utilizar para reducir esa brecha. No hay otros. No podemos reescribir el Acuerdo de París. Tenemos que cumplirlo. Debemos también ser capaces de establecer una nueva meta de movilización de recursos financieros al 2025, pero también cerrar la brecha de los 100.000 millones comprometidos. Por último, necesitamos fijar un set de reglas claras, donde el tema más importante será el marco reforzado de transparencia. No va a haber artículo 6 sin ello. El proceso de la COP se basa en la confianza, así como en el principio de responsabilidades comunes, pero diferenciadas. Es por eso que antes de dejar la presidencia de la COP, quiero hacer un llamado fuerte y claro a los líderes del G20, que hoy se encuentran reunidos en Roma, a cumplir los compromisos adquiridos. Amigas y amigos, soy optimista. Los procesos multilaterales no son fáciles ni rápidos, pero los acuerdos son esenciales. El éxito no está en dividirnos, no está en buscar culpables, ni en derrotar a otros, sino en sumar voluntades que nos permitan cumplir con nuestra palabra y que nuestras acciones realmente reflejen nuestro discurso. Siguen contando con Chile. Muchísimas gracias. Distinguished delegates, I would like to invite you to turn to sub-item 2 of the provisional agenda for the session, election of the President of the Conference of the Parties at its 26th session. You may recall that, in accordance with Rule 22, paragraph 1 of the draft Rules of the Procedure being applied, the office of the President of the Conference of the Parties is subject to rotation among the 5 regional groups. We now continue the cycle with a President from the Western Europe and other states. It gives me great pleasure to propose that the Conference elect by acclamation His Excellency, Mr. Alok Sharma, who will serve as President of the Conference at its 26th session. declare His Excellency, Mr. Alok Sharma, elect President of the 26th session of the Conference of the Parties. I congratulate Mr. Sharma on his election and wish him every success in guiding the work of the conference. I now invite Mr. Sharma to take his seat on the podium.
Friends, it's an honor to speak to you today for the first time as COP President. And I want to thank my dear friend Carolina for her really strong leadership over the past 2 years. Friends, I'm very aware of the responsibility placed upon me in this role, and I do not underestimate the challenge. But let me start first by formally welcoming you to Glasgow. And I want to thank you for all your efforts in getting to the United Kingdom, which I know for some has been arduous due to the impacts of the pandemic. Indeed, for almost 2 years now, the pandemic has caused devastation and disruption to lives and livelihoods across the world. And I know this has particularly affected the least developed countries and the small island developing states. And because of the pandemic, as you know, we postponed COP26 by a year. But during that year, climate change did not take time off. And the IPCC report in August was a wake-up call for all of us. It made clear that the lights are flashing red on the climate dashboard. That report, agreed by 195 governments, makes clear that human activity is unequivocally the cause of global warming. And we know that the window to keep 1.5 degrees within reach is closing. I've been humbled to speak over this year with communities devastated by climate change. On a visit to Jomsom in Nepal in the Hindu Kush region, I spoke to communities literally displaced from their homes from a combination of droughts and floods. In Barbuda, I met communities still suffering from the ravages of Hurricane Irma 4 years ago. I've spoken to the communities in East Africa fighting plagues of locusts spawned by climate change. And earlier this month, I spoke to a group of women in Madagascar, determinedly coping with what some describe as the first climate-induced famine in the world. Friends, in each of our countries, we are seeing the devastating impact of a changing climate. Floods, cyclones, wildfires, record temperatures. And we know that our shared planet is changing for the worse. And we can only address that together through this international system. And we know what we need to do, because 6 years ago in Paris, we agreed our shared goals. We said we would protect people and nature from the effects of climate change. We said we would get finance flowing to climate action. And we said we would limit the rise in global temperature to well below 2 degrees, pursuing efforts towards 1.5. The rapidly changing climate is sounding an alarm to the world to step up on adaptation, to address loss and damage, and to act now to keep 1.5 alive. And we know that this COP26, is our last best hope to keep 1.5 in reach. Now, I know that we have an unprecedented negotiations agenda ahead of us, but I believe that this international system can deliver. It must deliver. And as COP President, I am committed to promoting transparency and inclusivity, and I will lead this conference in accordance with the draft rules of procedure and with the utmost respect for the party-driven nature of our process. In that spirit, I believe that we can resolve the outstanding issues. We can move the negotiations forward, and we can launch a decade of ever-increasing ambition and action. And together, we can seize the enormous opportunities for green growth, for good green jobs, for cheaper, cleaner power. But we need to hit the ground running to develop the solutions that we need. And that work, my friends, starts today. And we will succeed or fail as one. Astronauts speak of the intense emotion they feel when looking back at Earth from space, seeing it gleaming through the darkness of the cosmos. Incredible, improbable, and infinitely precious. And if we act now, and we act together, we can protect our precious planet. So let's come together over these 2 weeks and ensure that where Paris promised, Glasgow delivers. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, and honoured guests. This morning, we are honoured to have with us His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Hoesung Lee, Chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Councillor Susan Aitken, Leader of Glasgow City Council, India Logan Riley, a representative of the Indigenous peoples, and Ms. Patricia Espinosa, UNFCCC Executive Secretary. And it is now my pleasure to invite Councillor Susan Aitken, Leader of Glasgow City Council, to address the plenary. Councillor Aitken, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Friends, it is my great pleasure, honour and responsibility to give the 26th United Nations Conference of the Parties the warmest of our famous welcomes to the city of Glasgow. There have been delays and uncertainties on our collective journey here. I'm extremely grateful to everyone who has worked in partnership with us as the host city to get us here to this point. But we are here now, and humanity looks to you and the work that you'll do over the next 2 weeks to fulfil the promise of Paris for a safer, sustainable, more equitable future for us all. Let the City of Glasgow and our people serve as an inspiration to you. This is a city that has been through some very tough times, but we have survived and thrived against the odds through resilience, innovation, imagination, a sense of community, a strong sense of social justice, humour and grit. These are all qualities that you'll need in abundance over the days ahead. And if you feel your determination flagging at any point, please take a walk outside, talk to a Glaswegian, and let the spirit that infuses this city infuse you too. And if, as you spend some time here, you feel yourself feeling a little bit bolder, a little bit bolshier, perhaps with a wee bit more swagger than usual, then that's just the Glasgow effect. Take inspiration too from Glasgow's climate ambition. If this post-industrial city, still living with the legacies of our high-carbon past, can have a plan for net zero by 2030, then there should be no limit on your ambitions either. Let the example of pioneer cities like this one light your way to the actions that you must agree here to safeguard our climate and our ecology for future generations. Glasgow couldn't be prouder of being the host for this pivotal moment for the future of the planet that we all share. Like the rest of the world, we'll be watching and judging. Our demands and expectations of you will be high, but we'll also be cheering you on and wishing you all the heart and courage that you need for the task that you have ahead of you. Once again, welcome to Glasgow. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aitken. It is now my pleasure to invite Ms. Patricia Espinosa, UNFCCC Executive Secretary, to address the plenary. Executive Secretary, you have the floor.
Honourable guests, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, our very long wait is over. It is with joy and enthusiasm that I officially welcome you to COP26. I thank the outgoing COP presidency of Chile and especially Minister Schmidt for their leadership in the last 2 challenging years. I also officially welcome the incoming UK presidency and Minister Sharma. I thank you for your collaborative efforts as we work together to make COP26 a resounding success. And to all of you, I say this: congratulations. Congratulations to those in this room, those watching online, and to everyone involved in this process. Think back on the last 2 years since we last met in Madrid. The early confusion, the pandemic and what it could mean for our process. Think about the decisions we made together, the skills we developed together to take advantage of communication technologies. Think also of those we lost to COVID-19. Our hearts are with those who continue to suffer. But let us also acknowledge what we have accomplished. We have kept the process going. We have not let the pandemic stand in the way of addressing the most critical issue facing this generation and those to come. We are here because of you and your work. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. Let's ensure that work was not in vain. As Scottish poet Robert Burns once wrote, "Now is the day Now is the hour. Colleagues, dear friends, we stand at a pivotal point in history. Humanity faces stark but clear choices. We either choose to achieve rapid and large-scale reductions of emissions to keep the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, or we accept that humanity faces a bleak future on this planet. We either choose to boost adaptation efforts to deal with current extreme weather disasters and build resilience to address future impacts, or we accept that more people will die, more families will suffer, and more economic harm will follow. We either choose to recognize that business as usual is not worth the devastating price we're paying and make the necessary transition to a more sustainable future, or we accept that we are investing in our own extinction. It's about much more than environment. It's about peace, stability, and the institutions we have built to promote the well-being of all. It is for these reasons and more that we must make progress here in Glasgow. We must make it a success, as President Sharma has just said. Success at COP, here at this COP, is entirely possible. Success is possible because we have the platform for action. The Paris Agreement is a covenant of hope with humanity. It has everything we need to achieve our climate goals. But to fully unleash its potential, we need full implementation. To get there, parties must finalize outstanding work under the agreement that has remained unfinished for far too long. Every day that goes by without being able to implement the Paris Agreement in full is a wasted day, the accumulation of which have real-world repercussions for people throughout the world, especially the most vulnerable. I call upon parties to complete the necessary work here at COP26 that will move us towards full implementation. Success is possible because we already know the pathway to solutions. The recently updated UN Climate Change NDC synthesis report showed that emissions continue to rise. That's the bad news. The good news is also showed that for those nations providing a new and updated NDC, emissions are projected to decrease by 2030. But the truth is that we need even more ambitions and all nations on board, especially the highest emitters in the G20, responsible for around 80% of global emissions. We also need to see provision of support to developing countries, another cornerstone of the Paris Agreement. With adequate support, emissions reductions can potentially be higher. This relates to the commitment to mobilize 100 billion from developed countries to developing countries. The delivery plan announced last week should be seen as a start, not the end. It's important to follow through with more detailed and concrete actions. But let us be clear, without the necessary support, we will not be able to embark on the transformations needed to achieve the 1.5-degree goal. This is not only about 100 billion. We need to mobilize the trillions. With respect to adaptation, we need to significantly increase financial support, especially for the most vulnerable countries. We need to accelerate the development and implementation of national adaptation plans. A clear path to solutions exists. I call upon all parties to recapture the spirit of multilateralism that resulted in the adoption of the Paris Agreement and fulfilled their commitments under it. Success is possible because we have the science. The data is unequivocal. Climate change is widespread, rapid, intensifying, and already impacting every region on Earth, on land, and in the ocean. But one number stands out above all others. We must limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. The IPCC, the NDC synthesis report, and the emissions gap report all tell us, however, that we are not on that path. I call upon all parties to use science to inform their decisions at COP26 and act upon it. Studies and statistics tell one story. But we must look beyond the numbers to the human lives they represent. I have been to the small island states threatened by rising waters. I have talked to school children frightened for their futures. I have talked to women who bear the burden of climate change at home, but are shut out of the search for solutions the minute they go out of the door. I have talked to youth frustrated with what they see as a bleak future. The message they all have in common is this: they want to be included. They are right. If we are sincere in calling climate change a global issue, then total inclusion must be the foundation upon which this process is built. COP26 needs to ensure that all voices and proposals are considered. I encourage the engagement of observers and other stakeholders, and I call upon parties to incorporate their ideas in the discussions here at COP26. We are all facing the same climate emergency. We must all be part of the solution. Dear colleagues, the transition that we need is beyond the scope, scale, and speed of anything humanity has accomplished in the past. It is a daunting task, but humanity is a species defined by its ingenuity. More than 2 centuries ago, the world was completely transformed by the Industrial Revolution. It was an era driven by the technology and innovation of their day, but also one with the residual impacts of greater economic and social division, environmental damage, and climate change. We can and must learn the lessons of history. Let ours be an era defined by the prosperity of the many rather than the short-term gain of the few. Let ours be an era in which we have healthier relationships with nature. Let ours be an era in which we protect our land, oceans, and biodiversity. Let Glasgow be the starting point of this new era, this new age of resilience, and let COP26 mark its beginning. It's entirely within our grasp, but getting there depends on the completion of our work here. It depends on the full implementation of the Paris Agreement. It depends on more climate action. It depends on you. It depends on all of us. Dear friends, the task ahead of you in these 2 weeks is significant. But look at what you have accomplished just to get this far. Success is entirely possible. I encourage you to keep the big picture in mind. I encourage you to look beyond your specific agenda item to what we're trying to achieve together. I encourage you to consider the choices that we must make and the trust vested in you by billions. Let us rise to the enormous challenge of our time, this pivotal point in history, and achieve success for not just our present generation, but all generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Secretary. The IPCC is currently in the process of preparing its 6th assessment report and has recently released Working Group 1's contribution to that assessment. I would therefore like to invite Mr. Hoesung Lee, Chair of the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, to address the plenary. Mr. Lee, you have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to address you on behalf of the IPCC at the opening of the COP26. First, our sincere thanks to the UNFCCC Secretariat and the UK government for the successful preparation of this landmark conference. We are equally grateful to the Scottish government and City of Glasgow for this preparation and warm welcome. It is a privilege to speak about climate change science here in Scotland, endowed with a rich scientific life and home to giants such as Alexander Fleming, Mary Somerville, and of course Adam Smith, the father of economics, just to name a few. Today's scientific knowledge and its achievement stands also on their shoulders. Prior to this conference, the IPCC released in August the first part of its ongoing 6th assessment report. It clearly laid out for the policymakers and stakeholders the most up-to-date physical science basis for the understanding of the climate system and climate change. Make no mistake, it's a sobering read. It reflects the magnitude of the collective challenge for all nations on this planet. Science shows that changes in the climate are widespread, rapid, and becoming more intense and affecting every part of the region. Thanks to major advance in science since our previous assessment report in 2013, today we have a much more precise and clearer picture of how the climate system works, which let us understand better what has changed in the past and what is changing now and what can be the changes in the future on the climate system and why they matter for every region. It is now unequivocal that human influence is causing climate change, making extreme events more frequent and more severe. Some recent hot extremes, such as heat waves in the last 10 years, would have been extremely unlikely to occur without human influence on the climate system. Global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius will be exceeded during this century unless immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, especially the carbon dioxide and methane, occur in the nearest future. We also bring a wealth of understanding about climate change at the regional level, which is critically relevant for shaping policies. I encourage everyone to seize the moment, seize the opportunity this gathering offers. We, the scientific community, are ready to work with you on the understanding of scientific evidence of climate change, its impacts, adaptations, and how these translate into realities of climate action. We share one atmosphere, one climate system. It knows no borders. The true measure of the effectiveness of our collective efforts will be the state of its condition. And science will attest to that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. It is now my pleasure to invite His Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shahid, President of the United Nations General Assembly, to address the plenary. Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, allow me to be candid, for you are family. We are facing an existential crisis. We have the capacity and resources to address this crisis, but we are simply not doing enough. We must be honest about this with ourselves, with each other, and with the rest of the world. We have had decades to argue the facts about climate change, but the power of renewables, about the fine details of monitoring or cost sharing. Yet, we have still failed to act with the conviction and determination required. That may be a hard truth, but it is the truth. Another truth: we are entirely capable of turning this around if we so choose. Excellencies, since assuming the role of the President of the General Assembly, I've heard more about climate change than any other subject. I heard it from every single world leader and delegate at the high-level week. I heard it on my travels from youth, from civil society, from local leaders, and from women's groups. I heard it last Tuesday at the General Assembly meeting on climate change that I convened ahead of COP26. While the intensity of their tones varied, their messages were one and the same: the urgency of keeping with 1.5 degrees target, the need to support vulnerable populations, the irresponsibility of not capitalizing on technological innovations, and the importance of empowering women and youth. I promised the membership of the General Assembly that I would bring this message to Glasgow. First, renewable technologies are now among the cheapest on the planet and command strong public support. With the news that climate finance will not reach the promised goal of 100 billion annually until 2023, we must accelerate our efforts to ensure that all countries have access to the latest technological innovations. Second, nearly $100 trillion have been pledged to net zero targets by the private sector. Yet, it is unclear how they will be utilized, prioritized, or measured. It is imperative that their contributions are as efficient and impactful as possible. Third, we must maintain focus on adaptation, particularly for vulnerable countries. We must ensure there is an even 50-50 split in adaptation and mitigation financing. Fourth, green jobs are the future, promising both economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. We owe to the world's almost 1.8 billion youth to not only make the transition to blue and green economies, but to also invest in their skills and tap into their energies to make that transition viable. Excellencies, 6 years ago in Paris, we celebrated an agreement that committed us to keeping global temperatures from rising above 1.5 degrees. We pledged to protect those most vulnerable, and we acknowledged that this was a planetary problem, that no country could go alone. Yet since Paris, it has rained for the first time on Greenland summit. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has reached record levels. Heat waves have scorched countries around the world. Droughts, storms, forest fires, and floods have all become more intense, more recurrent, and more commonplace. And sea levels are rising, threatening small island states and coastal communities alike. My friends, we have the science, we have the resources, we agree on the urgency. What then is holding us back? My dear friends, only one variable remains, and it is us. We have to make the choice to address climate change. We have to choose the hard but necessary actions. We have to listen to the science and increasingly our global population who are demanding action. My dear, dear friends, we have run out of excuses. It is time to do the right thing. In the words of Frankie the dinosaur who addressed the General Assembly, let us not choose extinction. Let us work together as one global family and use the capacities and capabilities at hand to do what needs to be done. Let us get it done. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Now, upon my special invitation, it is my pleasure to invite India Logan Riley, a representative of the indigenous peoples, to address the plenary. India, you have the floor.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Hello everyone. Ko kahuraniki te maunga, ko toki te awa, ko ngaruroro te awa, ko tūtaikuri te awa, ko ngā takangunu te iwi, ti hei mauri ora. Ko India Mero Logan Riley aho. My name is India, and I am from a nation called Ngā Takangunu on the east coast of the North Island of Aotearoa, colonially known as New Zealand. In February of last year, catastrophic climate change-fueled wildfires tore their way across eastern Australia. The smoke cloud was so big that the sun turned red in my own homelands, far from the east coast of Australia. At that time, I was supporting my younger brother in hospital, and the doctors told us that they were seeing higher amounts of people with breathing issues related to the smoke in the air. In that moment, our health was bound to the struggle of the land and people in another country. In the impacts of climate change, our fates are intertwined, as are the historic forces that have brought us together today. Before we embark on these 2 weeks of negotiations, it is important to reflect on how we ended up in this room, with thousands of other people masked up and poised to deliberate. And to do this, I must go back hundreds of years into the roots of imperialist expansion and the story of my own community. 252 years ago, invading forces sent by the ancestors of this presidency arrived in my ancestors' territories, heralding an age of violence and murder and destruction enabled by documents like the Doctrine of Discovery that were formulated in Europe. Land in my region was stolen by the British Crown in order to extract oil and suck the land of all its nutrients, while seeking to displace my people and end our practices. The first time I personally experienced these violent processes was at 10 years old, when the local council attempted to steal our community's land for the construction of a highway. And then after that, the New Zealand government stole the foreshore and seabed and offered it up for deep-sea oil drilling the following year. These historic forces continue to shape my life and have brought me here. I have grown up in these negotiations, spending my 20s running through these halls, lobbying decision makers, and staying up far past midnight hand-stitching banners. Since my first climate talks in Paris, I've been giving the same speech. I've been applauded and awarded for conjuring emotive imagery of rising sea levels and yearly wildfires that my community continues to endure. 6 years ago, I first spoke these stories into this space, and every year since, I have repeated the same words: wildfires, sea level rise, wildfires, suffering, sea level rise, biodiversity loss, sea level rise. Emissions continue to rise. I'm the same age as these negotiations. I've grown up, graduated, fallen in love, fallen out of love, stopped and changed a couple of careers along the way, all while the global north, colonial governments and corporations fudge with the future. And as Indigenous, knowing that this history shows us that hands and minds made this present world, and so it is also hands and hearts and minds that can remake it. And it is Indigenous and frontline communities that are leading this remaking. We're keeping fossil fuels in the ground and stopping fossil fuel expansion. We're halting infrastructure that would increase emissions and saying no to false solutions. In fact, in the US and Canada alone, Indigenous resistance has stopped or delayed greenhouse gas pollution equivalent to at least 1/4 of annual emissions. What we do works. In the face of mediocre leadership, Indigenous peoples shine through. This is all to say that climate change is the final outcome of the colonial project, and in our response, we must be decolonial, rooted in justice and care for communities like mine who have borne the burden of the global north greed for far too long. I cannot put it more simply than that we know what we are doing, and if you aren't willing to back us or let us lead, then you're complicit in the death and destruction that is happening across the globe. Rights frameworks must be entrenched in the Paris rulebook. Finance must be redistributed from the likes of war games in the Pacific towards loss and damage and a just transition. And richer countries have to commit to steep emissions reductions this decade, rather than palming off responsibility through carbon markets. And last but not least, land back, oceans back. This is all part of following Indigenous leadership. This is what keeping warming below 1.5 degrees looks like. This is an invitation to you. This COP, learn our histories, listen to our stories, honour our knowledge, and get in line or get out of the way. Kia ora. Thank you.
Thank you, India. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of the opening statements of COP26. May I please ask you to remain in your seats whilst we escort our guests from the podium. Distinguished delegates, I now invite the conference to consider sub-item 2B of the provisional agenda, adoption of the rules of procedure. The draft rules are contained in document FCCC/CP/1996/2. Parties may recall that the draft rules of procedure are being applied with the exception of draft Rule 42 on voting due to the lack of consensus. This has been the case since the first session of the Conference of Parties in 1995. At COP25, the President held consultations and reported that there were that there continue to be no consensus on the matter and propose that consultations continue at COP26. I therefore propose that we continue to apply the draft rules of procedure with the exception of draft rule 42. I would like to propose that Ken O'Flaherty of my delegation holds informal consultations on this issue. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Let us now consider sub-item 2C of the provisional agenda, adoption of the agenda. I wish to thank all parties for their active and constructive engagement in our consultations on the agendas for COP26, CMP 16 and CMA 3. Whilst parties expressed a range of views, there was a common desire to initiate proceedings swiftly and smoothly today. With the eyes of the world on Glasgow, this will send an important signal to the world that parties remain committed to addressing the global challenge of climate change. Several groups and parties expressed concern about the large number of new agenda items proposed by the parties on top of an unprecedented workload in Glasgow resulting from the accumulation of mandates from COP25 and from 2020 and 2021. I wish to thank Turkey for its flexibility in withdrawing its proposal for an item in the COP agenda. Before presenting the agenda of the COP for adoption, please allow me to first outline my proposals for the agendas of the COP, the CMP, and the CMA as they are interrelated. I will also touch on the organisation of work for some specific agenda items based on the consultations conducted and feedback received by the Presidency. Last night, the Secretariat issued documents FCCC/2021/1/Addendum 2. FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/1/Addendum 1 and FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/1/Addendum 2, which contain the revised provisional agendas proposed for adoption by the COP, by the CMP and CMA respectively. These supersede the previously issued supplementary and provisional agendas and reflect a number of understandings and commitments on my part. I hope that all delegations have these documents before them. These documents are the result of intensive consultations held over the past days. I wish to thank all parties for their constructive engagement and their flexibility. In presenting the revised provisional agendas, I wish to provide several clarifications. For the purpose of transparency, I will explain the revisions made. On the proposal for the plurinational state of Bolivia to include an item on the agenda of the COP entitled All Matters of Adaptation, and the proposal by Gabon on behalf of the Africa Group to include an item in the agenda of the CMA entitled Matters Related to Adaptation, with related sub-items, the new proposal in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/1 Addendum 2 revises item 4 of the CMA agenda to read Matters Related to Adaptation. This item now includes sub-item A, reports of the Adaptation Committee in brackets 2019 and 2020, and sub-item B, report of the Adaptation Committee in brackets 2021 and the Global Goal on Adaptation. On the proposal by Gabon, on behalf of the African Group, that each item under the Standing Committee on Finance be reflected as separate sub-items, the new proposals provide that sub-item 8B of the COP agenda and sub-item 8A of the CMA agenda be revised to read matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance, with a footnote that would read, recognizing the proposal received from Gabon on behalf of the African Group on 17th of August 2021, with a link to the letter from Gabon containing the proposal. I propose to hold presidency consultations on these sub-items. On the following matters, I propose to engage in alternative forms of consultation rather than including them in the agendas. On the proposal by Gabon on behalf of the African Group to include a new item on the agenda of the CMA entitled Special Needs and Special Circumstances of Africa, I propose to hold presidency consultations on special needs and special circumstances of Africa. These consultations will be reported back to me, including setting out a possible way forward. On the proposal by the plurinational state of Bolivia to include in the agenda of COP an item entitled Equitable, Fair, Ambitious and Urgent Real Emissions Reductions now consistent with a trajectory to reduce the temperature below 1.5 degrees, I commit to facilitating discussions on the urgent actions required to keep 1.5 degrees within reach as part of the presidency-led consultations on the overarching cover decisions. This issue will also be addressed through the following special events. The COP26 World Leaders Summit on the 1st and 2nd of November. The headline event of Science and Innovation Day, titled Responding to the IPCC Report, Keeping 1.5 Degrees Alive. This is to be held on the 9th of November. The information event to update parties on the findings of the NDC Synthesis Report to be held on the 3rd of November. On the proposal by Switzerland on behalf of the Environmental Integrity Group for an item in the CMA entitled Reporting and Review pursuant to Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, Provision of Financial and Capacity Building Support to Developing Countries, I will create space through presidency consultations to address this issue and in doing so address the concerns raised by the Environmental Integrity Group. I'm proposing that the following requests be addressed under existing agenda items. On the proposal by Georgia to include an item in the agenda of the COP entitled Achieving Equitable Geographic Representation in the Composition of Constituted Bodies under the Convention, I propose that this matter be addressed under agenda item 2D and request Vice President Mohammed Irfan Tariq to consult on the composition of constituted bodies during his consultations on the election of officers. On the proposal by the plurinational state of Bolivia to include an item in the CMA entitled Stocktake on Financial Support and Means of Implementation for Alternative Policy Approaches such as Joint Mitigation and Adaptation Approaches for the Integral and Sustainable Management of Forests, I propose that parties consider this matter in the context of deliberations on items on matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance and guidance to the Green Climate Fund. I also commit to following up after COP26 with both the Standing Committee on Finance and the Board of the Green Climate Fund on their mandated work on financial support and means of implementation for alternative policy approaches. Finally, following consultations, I am proposing not to include the proposal by Gabon on behalf of the African Group for an item on the CMP agenda entitled The Third Commitment Period of Annex B Parties to the Kyoto Protocol in accordance with its Article 3, Paragraph 9, and the entry into force and completion of the Kyoto Protocol Second Commitment Period. Regarding the organisation of work, I will propose the following. Under COP Agenda Item 7 and CMA Agenda Item 7, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage Associated with Climate Change Impacts, I will propose to hold presidency consultations. Further, I propose that the COP agenda be adopted with the following items held in abeyance. COP item 14, consideration of proposals by parties for amendments to the Convention under Article 15. A, proposal from the Russian Federation to amend Article 4, paragraph 2F of the Convention. B, proposal from Papua New Guinea and Mexico to amend Articles 7 and 18 of the Convention. COP item 15, second review of the adequacy of Article 4, paragraphs 2A and B of the Convention. Dear delegates, with these understandings and with immense gratitude for the flexibility shown by all parties to allow work to begin forthwith, I therefore propose that the provisional agenda as contained in document FCCC/CP/2021/1 Addendum 2 be adopted with items 14A, 14B and 15 held in abeyance. I see that Ukraine has requested the floor. Ukraine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question whether we are going on each agenda item or now we are going to adopt the agenda as a whole. Because in case we will go step by step by each agenda item, I will have a statement on agenda item 4. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So we will now adopt the agenda for the COP, and then I will go through the CMA, etc. I hope that provides the explanation that you require. Thank you. I see that Timor-Leste has requested the floor. Timor-Leste, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Good morning, Excellencies, friends and colleagues. Thank you very much for facilitating the agenda item 7 of the COP and also agenda item 7 of the CMA. It has been clear for us that footnote is there, but we need to be sure that both COP and CMA will be receiving a report from the SBs. It means our work here under the guidance of the SBI and also SAPSTA will be reported back to both COP and CMA. This is our need and this is our aim. How could we cover all the issues under both COP and also CMA? Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for that. May I just revert to what I said about the organization of work, and what I had proposed is that under COP item 7 and CMA agenda item 7, Warsaw International Mechanisms for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impacts, I will propose to hold presidency consultations. I hope that provides the explanation that you are seeking. I see that Ukraine has requested the floor once again. Ukraine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, the delegation of Ukraine would also like to ask to defer the consideration of the item 4 of the COP26 agenda. The provisional agenda annotations for agenda item 4 mention that the Secretariat prepared a compilation and synthesis report on the information reported by parties included in Annex 1 to the Convention in their 7th National Communications, 3rd and 4th biennial reports for consideration in this session. However, there is no reference to any specific document available which might be considered under this agenda item by the parties. In this regard, let me recall that at our previous session, there were concerns as to these documents raised by the delegation of Ukraine. Unfortunately, despite the reassurances we received from the Secretariat, the concerns have not been met. Given the need to ensure a consistent application by the Secretariat of the agreed approach, the delegation of Ukraine stands for deferment of the consideration of COP26 agenda item 4. Namely, we refer to the third and fourth biennial reports of the Russian Federation, as well as compilation and synthesis of the third and fourth biennial reports of parties included in Annex 1 to the Convention. We ask to include the statement in the report of COP26. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you for the statement, and we note your concerns. I see that Bolivia has requested the floor. Bolivia, you have the floor.
Presidente, distinguidos delegados y delegadas, estamos hoy aquí en esta sesión inaugural de la COP26, representantes de nuestros países y bajo la atenta mirada de los pueblos del mundo que conviven en nuestra casa común, que es nuestra madre tierra. Millones de personas ya han sufrido los efectos adversos de la crisis climática y que después de casi 30 años de negociaciones climáticas nos interpelan pidiéndonos que finalmente demos una respuesta eficaz que permita reconducir la actual emergencia climática global. Bolivia ha solicitado la inclusión en la agenda de la COP26 el tema sobre reducciones de emisiones reales, equitativas, justas, ambiciosas, urgentes, ahora, consistentes con una trayectoria para mantener la temperatura por debajo de 1,5 grados. Este tema ha sido incorporado como el punto 16 de la agenda provisional, pero ya ha sido removido. La agenda de la COP no cuenta ya con este punto como parte de sus temas de discusión, porque no ha existido un consenso de los países para poder incorporar esta temática. Esto refleja que todas las visiones de los países para alcanzar el objetivo de limitar la temperatura en 1,5 grados solamente son declaraciones políticas, sin ningún nivel de compromiso, prácticos y operativos. Pese a que este tema ha sido removido de la agenda, esperamos que la presidencia de la COP pueda encontrar espacios para discutir este tema, que es uno de los temas centrales de debate sobre la crisis climática. Una COP de cambio climático no puede ignorar el tema principal de la crisis climática, que tiene que ver con la definición de las soluciones reales y concretas para limitar el incremento de la temperatura. Las siguientes reflexiones realizadas por los pueblos de Bolivia justifican la necesidad que se tiene que poner en marcha un proceso profundo de reflexión sobre la necesidad de alcanzar un incremento de la temperatura consistente, con 1,5 grados centígrados, pero de forma real e inmediata, y no pensando en el 2050. En primer lugar, tenemos que denunciar al mundo entero que la crisis climática no ha sido detenida hasta ahora porque los países desarrollados del anexo 1 han incumplido de forma sistemática sus promesas en las negociaciones climáticas. El protocolo de Kioto ha sido promulgado en el 97 para acordar los compromisos específicos legalmente vinculantes. En primer lugar, el primer periodo de compromisos del 2008 al 2012, los países desarrollados, conocidos como países del anexo 1, se adhieren a recortes insignificantes de emisiones agregadas del 5% en comparación con los niveles del año 1990. A pesar de esta admisión muy baja, Estados Unidos abandona el protocolo. El Acuerdo de París ha sido aprobado el año 2011 sobre la base de que los países desarrollados acordarán nuevas obligaciones de reducciones de las emisiones el año 2013 y 2020, en el marco del segundo periodo de compromisos del protocolo de Kioto. Lamentablemente, las demoras en la ratificación entre muchos países desarrollados hicieron que la enmienda de Doha al protocolo de Kioto para su segundo periodo de compromisos entra en una vigencia solo el último día del 2020. Los países desarrollados también acordaron en Doha el año 2012 revisar sus objetivos de reducción de emisiones para fines del 2014 y aumentar su nivel de ambición. No solo se elevó el nivel de la ambición, los países desarrollados, de hecho, aumentaron sus ambiciones entre el año 1990 y 2020. Esto junto con la negativa de que algunos países desarrollados, al asumir nuevas metas bajo el protocolo de Kioto, resaltan su falta de ambición de mitigación. Los países desarrollados han hecho muchos compromisos y nunca los han cumplido. En segundo lugar, tenemos que aclarar al mundo entero que el calentamiento global es el resultado de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero que están consumiendo el espacio atmosférico y que existe una responsabilidad histórica de los países desarrollados con este gasto que no quieren asumir. Durante una propia fase de industrialización, los países desarrollados han abusado de su espacio de carbono y han utilizado el de los países en desarrollo como el nuestro. El presupuesto de carbono para evitar un incremento de la temperatura por debajo de 1,5 grados es cada vez más reducido y estamos a punto de agotarlo. El aumento de la temperatura global, según los últimos datos publicados por el IPCC, del total de emisiones de CO2 que aún podrían ser lanzadas a la atmósfera sin superar el calentamiento global de 1,5 grados, oscilan entre el 67% en probabilidad. Es en estos momentos donde solo 400 gigatoneladas son las que se encuentran en ese rango. Es una cantidad muy reducida teniendo en cuenta que las emisiones globales anuales ascienden a 42 gigatoneladas. Nuestra preocupación tiene sus bases en simples cálculos matemáticos. Las emisiones acumuladas en el 2030 han alcanzado la atmósfera y están ascendiendo en 445 gigatoneladas de CO2 y por lo tanto habremos agotado y sobrepasado en 45 gigatoneladas el presupuesto global de carbono. Es decir, si seguimos con la implementación de los NDC actuales, en el 2030 el objetivo del 1,5 grados va a ser un objetivo inalcanzable porque ya se habrá sobrepasado este umbral. Si los países desarrollados continúan emitiendo y ocupando espacio atmosférico durante los próximos 30 años, las metas globales de la Autoridad Palestina y el objetivo de la Convención no se van a cumplir. Los países desarrollados deberían reconocer esas emisiones de carbono acumuladas históricas y acumuladas per cápita y dejar el espacio atmosférico restante para los derechos de desarrollo del mundo en desarrollo y apuntar a su descarbonización total dentro de esta década. Si continúan emitiendo y ocupando más espacio atmosférico, durante los próximos 30 años las metas globales de la Autoridad Palestina y el objetivo de la Convención no se van a cumplir. En tercer lugar, tenemos que ser absolutamente conscientes que existe una enorme brecha entre las reducciones que requiere la Madre Tierra y los pobres compromisos de reducción de emisiones de los países, que principalmente deben ser compromisos de los países desarrollados, porque son ellos quienes deben tomar el liderazgo de la reducción de las emisiones. Los dos últimos informes del IPCC nos dicen que para conseguir estabilizar el aumento de la temperatura en 1,5 grados, las emisiones de CO2 en el 2030 deberían reducirse en 45% respecto a los niveles del año 2010. El 45% de la reducción debería ser principal referencia en la lucha contra el cambio climático para esta década. El cambio climático, de acuerdo al informe síntesis presentado por el secretario, indica que los NDCs actuales nos van a llevar en el 2030 a un nivel de emisiones globales del 16,3% por encima del año 2010. Reducir estos niveles de emisiones es responsabilidad principal de los países desarrollados porque ellos tienen la mayor responsabilidad histórica sobre el gasto del presupuesto de carbono y los mayores niveles per cápita de emisiones de carbono. En cuarto lugar, Tenemos que denunciar al mundo entero que el llamado de emisiones netas cero al 2050 es un llamado que profundiza la inequidad y la injusticia climática, que nos llevará a un incremento de la temperatura más allá de los 3 grados a fines de este siglo y a una catástrofe global. A pesar de una falta de ambición demostrada en el periodo anterior al 2030, así como en sus índices de acuerdo al Acuerdo de París, los principales países desarrollados ahora están presionando para cambiar los objetivos del Acuerdo de París, al pedir a todos los países que adopten objetivos netos cero para el 2050. Este nuevo objetivo que está avanzando va en contra del Acuerdo de París y es en contra de la equidad y la justicia climática. Las demandas de las emisiones netas cero para todos los países para el 2050 incrementa aún más las desigualdades existentes entre los países desarrollados y los países en desarrollo. Lejos de significar ambiciones climáticas, la frase de emisiones netas cero están siendo utilizadas por la mayoría de los gobiernos de los países desarrollados y corporaciones contaminantes para evadir sus responsabilidades, disfrazando la inacción climática para seguir con las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero en la atmósfera. Las estrategias de emisiones netas cero no están realizando ni tomando en consideración los criterios de equidad y justicia climática. Que el mundo deba alcanzar la neutralidad de las emisiones al 2050 no implica que todos los países debamos alcanzar esta en la misma fecha. Esto constituiría una grave injusticia y vulneración del principio de responsabilidades comunes pero diferenciadas y de las respectivas capacidades, en base a la equidad y a la voluntad de la justicia climática. Los países del norte global deberían alcanzar neutralidad de emisiones mucho antes, mientras que los países del sur podrían alcanzarlas después. Estimados delegados y delegadas, les pido a todos ustedes que por unos minutos levantemos la mirada por encima de los legítimos intereses de los estados a los que representamos y que todos pensemos en conjunto, en conjunto por la biosfera terrestre, por la madre tierra y por la humanidad. Han pasado ya 6 años desde la aprobación del Acuerdo de París y en lugar de avanzar estamos retrocediendo. Es triste constatar que el día de hoy los resultados de la implementación del acuerdo son exactamente pobres y preocupantes. El actual proceso de negociaciones de la implementación del Acuerdo de París nos conduce a un cambio inminente en el ciclo vital de la madre tierra. De continuar por esta senda, condenaremos al planeta a una 6ª extinción masiva y a una gran parte de la humanidad a su desaparición, solo para favorecer los intereses de un sistema capitalista depredador, sin querer frenar el colapso climático. La COP26 tiene que dar un giro radical en la forma como estamos enfrentando la crisis climática. La presente década es decisiva para enfrentar el colapso climático y hablar de promesas para aquí en adelante, de aquí a 30 años, cuando ya será irremediablemente tarde, es una posición irresponsable y suicida con la vida del planeta y de la humanidad. Presidente, delegados y delegadas, para conseguir este objetivo deberíamos ser capaces de aprobar una decisión específica en la COP26 que permita incrementar de forma extraordinaria la inmediata reducción de las emisiones por parte de los países desarrollados del anexo 1. Consideramos que esto debe realizarse en el marco del artículo 4, párrafo 2, inciso D, de la Convención que prevé una revisión de la idoneidad del artículo 4, párrafo 2, inciso A e inciso B, a intervalos regulares determinados por la COP, para que el objetivo se cumpla en esta convención, para permitir que estos elementos deberían contener una decisión de la COP en la siguiente dirección. Deberíamos organizar un grupo de trabajo durante el año 2022 para avanzar en un proceso que permita operacionalizar todos los aspectos necesarios para alcanzar una trayectoria consistente al 1,5 grados. Este grupo de trabajo tendría la tarea de identificar la parte justa del presupuesto de carbono que corresponde a los países del anexo 1, de acuerdo con los compromisos de equidad y CBDR, consistente con una trayectoria para mantener la temperatura debajo del 1,5 grados para el periodo 2023-2030. Los países del anexo 1, en este marco, tendrían que establecer un compromiso vinculante voluntario por parte de las partes del anexo 1. Medidas de mitigación extraordinarias adicionales a sus actuales índices para lograr una reducción real de las emisiones ahora entre el año 2023-2030 en lugar de 0 emisiones netas, como un acuerdo que se representaría en la COP27 el año 2022. También se tendría que definir la provisión de financiamiento y medios de implementación para que los países en desarrollo aumenten su ambición de mitigación y adaptación en consecuencia. Los países del anexo 1 deben tomar la decisión de compensar a los países en desarrollo por hacer su justa y equitativa de presupuesto de carbono, mediante la provisión de financiamiento y transferencia de tecnología, así como para ayudar en la creación de capacidad de esos países. Esperamos que en esta COP26 exista el espacio necesario para discutir estos temas vinculados a las propuestas prácticas para limitar el incremento de la temperatura en 1,5 grados centígrados. Distinguidos delegados, delegadas, presidente, la ciudadanía mundial nos está mirando y nos pide acción. A nosotros nos toca urgentemente decisiones valientes, con una perspectiva global y a la altura de la extremada y delicada situación que estamos atravesando. La responsabilidad que tenemos con las generaciones presentes y futuras y con nuestra madre tierra es cada día más urgente y enorme. Es por ello que como Bolivia hemos convocado una acción urgente y equitativa para lograr una reducción de las emisiones que permita limitar el incremento de la temperatura a 1,5 grados centígrados en el marco de esta COP26. Es un llamado a que los países desarrollados del anexo 1 realicen reducciones de emisiones reales extraordinarias e inmediatas para limitar de forma real y efectiva el incremento de la temperatura por debajo de los 1,5 grados centígrados. Creemos, como Bolivia, que esto es posible. Creemos, presidente, delegados, delegadas, que el día de hoy nos hemos reunido y vamos a trabajar juntos justamente por poder frenar esta crisis climática y enfrentarla entre todos ahora. Gracias.
So I thank Bolivia for its statement and, of course, for demonstrating flexibility. And I would just refer all parties to the statement I made earlier on the proposal from Bolivia. I have committed to facilitating a discussion on the urgent actions required to keep 1.5 within reach as part of presidency-led consultation on the overarching cover decision. And I've also set out a number of special events where this item will be covered. Thank you to Bolivia for its statement. I see that Venezuela has requested the floor. Venezuela, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. Brevemente, quiero expresar unas palabras. En primer lugar, felicitar a la delegada de Bolivia por tan interesante y alentadora intervención que ha realizado. En nombre del Grupo ALBA en Cambio Climático, queremos felicitarlo en primer lugar por la presidencia, por haber asumido la presidencia de la Conferencia de las Partes. Y queremos también, en el nombre de Venezuela, decirle que estamos listos para participar en una manera constructiva en el proceso de cambio climático. Hemos tratado de llamar la atención con distintos colegas en distintos espacios en los que hemos participado sobre una preocupación muy específica que ha traído Venezuela para esta conferencia y tiene que ver con elementos externos, colaterales, que de alguna u otra manera interfieren en la implementación del Acuerdo de París. Nosotros hemos venido celebrando en el ámbito nacional una serie de actividades que tienen que ver con un mandato específico que recibimos de la reunión de jefes de Estado del grupo ALBA-TCP celebrada en Caracas el 24 de junio del 2021. El mandato específicamente nos señala que debemos promover un diálogo sobre la afectación de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales en la acción climática. En este sentido, señor presidente, le quería comentar que en estos tiempos de cuarentena nosotros hemos estado abocados a celebrar una cantidad importante de actividades que han convocado a expertos, académicos, a juristas internacionales, a expertos relatores de Naciones Unidas sobre el tema de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales y su incidencia en la acción climática. Expertos relatores de reconocimiento internacional, les puedo mencionar el nombre de la doctora Elena Dohan, del profesor Jeffrey Sachs, el profesor Hernández Bretón y así un número, no sé si me puede seguir o...
Thank you very much. Yes, I am following. Please proceed.
Este número importante de actividades que hemos celebrado de manera virtual con reconocidos juristas internacionales sobre la incidencia y la afectación de las medidas unilaterales y de las medidas coercitivas unilaterales en la acción climática y en los derechos ambientales. Hemos planteado tener la oportunidad en la conferencia de las partes de tener un espacio, porque este tema está contenido en la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas. Entonces queremos que de alguna u otra manera la agenda prevea un espacio para tener una discusión sobre este aspecto, tanto en la conferencia de la Convención como en la conferencia del Acuerdo de París. Quería señalar que las medidas coercitivas unilaterales abarcan un amplio espectro, constituyéndose en acciones que afectan de forma directa e indirecta las capacidades para responder a la acción de la crisis del cambio climático y en las capacidades de respuesta de los Estados. Estaríamos haciendo referencia a una nueva categorización de vulnerabilidad climática. Por tanto, es indudable la pertinencia de su tratamiento en esta agenda de la Convención de Cambio Climático. Por eso queríamos plantearle, porque estamos en una reunión en unas circunstancias excepcionales por la pandemia, no tengo la certeza que todas las propuestas hayan cumplido con los 6 meses de antelación, porque la confirmación de la celebración de la conferencia fue incluso posterior a esta norma de los 6 meses. Entonces queríamos tener la seguridad de que vamos a contar con un espacio en la agenda para poder tratar este tema. Le agradezco que haya podido confirmarme la recepción del mensaje que Venezuela está enviando y si no, puedo pasar al inglés. Gracias.
Yes, thank you very much for that. I did indeed follow the points that were being raised, and I thank you for your concerns. There are a number of places in the existing agenda to raise these concerns, and we've obviously had extensive consultations on the agenda, and I would appeal to all parties that we may be able to proceed with the adoption of the agenda. Friends, hearing no objections, having first, of course, heard all your views, but now hearing no objections, it is so decided. I will appoint senior members of my delegation to consult on agenda item 7, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impacts, and sub-agenda item 8b, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance. I will keep parties informed on the progress of the consultations. The conference is now invited to consider sub-item 2d of the agenda, election of officers other than the President. Mr. Mohammed Irfan Tariq, Vice President of COP, has begun consultations on behalf of the COP25 President on the elections for officers for the bodies of the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. Groups have not yet completed their consultations, and nominations are still pending. I would like to thank Mr. Tariq for his work so far, and I propose that he continues the consultations until the nominations have been finalized. In accordance with the established practice, those consultations will include the nominations to all bodies for elections during this conference. With regard to the Bureau of the COP, I propose to postpone action on the election of the COP26 Bureau until all nominations are finalized, and to return to this item at the closing plenary of the COP to conduct the election. Confirmed nominees to the COP26 Bureau will be invited to attend meetings of the Bureau as observers during the conference until the elections have taken place. Parties will note that only 7 out of the 212 nominations expected have been received. Further, women currently comprise only 36% of the membership of Convention, Kyoto Protocol, and Paris Agreement bodies. I urge parties to nominate men and women equally so that we can achieve the goal of gender balance. I urge parties to intensify efforts to conclude the remaining nominations so that these can be transmitted by the deadline of 8 p.m. on Saturday, the 6th of November. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. The conference is now invited to consider sub-item 2e of the agenda, admission of organizations as observers. The conference has before it document FCCC/CP/2021/7, which includes a list of IGOs and NGOs that have expressed a wish to participate in our work at COP26. This list was the basis on which organizations were informed of their pre-admittance status to COP26, on the understanding that the final authority to grant admission lies with the COP. In accordance with the recommendations of the Bureau on this matter, I invite the conference to admit as observers the organizations listed in document FCCC/CP/2021/7. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite delegates to consider sub-item 2F of the agenda, organisation of work, including the sessions of the subsidiary bodies. Today, the governing and subsidiary bodies will convene their opening plenaries and launch work under all agenda items. Upon completion of the opening plenaries of the Substa and SBI, the 5 bodies will reconvene in a joint plenary to hear statements from groups and observer organisations. On the following items, the COP will take appropriate action on the basis of recommendations from the subsidiary bodies. Item 4, reporting from and review of parties included in Annex 1 to the Convention. Item 5, reporting from parties not included in Annex 1 to the Convention. Item 6, report of the Adaptation Committee for 2019, 2020 and 2021. Sub-items A and B of item 9, development and transfer of technologies. Item 10, capacity building under the Convention. Item 11, matters relating to the least developed countries. Item 12, report of the Forum on the impact of the implementation of response measures. Item 13, gender and climate change. Sub-items A, B and C of item 16, administrative, financial and institutional matters. These items are already on the agendas of the respective subsidiary body, and that body may develop draft decisions or conclusions for consideration by the COP as appropriate. In addition, I propose to refer the following matters to the relevant subsidiary bodies. Under agenda item 6, report of the Adaptation Committee for 2019, 2020 and 2021, I propose to refer the review of the progress, effectiveness and performance of the Adaptation Committee to the SBSTA and the SBI. Under agenda item 13, gender and climate change, I propose to refer the consideration of the annual report on gender composition and the synthesis report on progress in integrating a gender perspective in constituted body processes to the SBI. On Saturday, 6th of November, the SBSTA and the SBI will conclude their work. I look forward to receiving the results of the SBSTA under the leadership of Mr. Tosi Mpanu and of the SPI under the leadership of Ms. Marianne Carlson. Upon closure of the SBSTA and the SBI, I will convene an informal stock-taking meeting to assess the status of negotiations and to propose our way of working during the second week of the conference. Dear colleagues, tomorrow, Monday the 1st of November, we will be honoured with the presence of His Excellency Mr. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, other heads of state and government, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, and other dignitaries for the official opening ceremony and the inauguration of the high-level segment which will form part of the World Leaders Summit. This first part of the high-level segment will be held from Monday the 1st to Tuesday the 2nd of November. The high-level segment will then resume on Tuesday the 9th of November and Wednesday the 10th of November to continue hearing national statements from parties whose head of state or government did not speak during the first part. On Wednesday, the 10th of November, upon conclusion of the national statements, we will hear statements from senior representatives of intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations. On Thursday, the 11th of November, and Friday, the 12th of November, the COP will reconvene to consider the decisions and conclusions for adoption. Hearing no objections, we will proceed I call Ukraine to the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The delegation of Ukraine just would like to reiterate that the agenda item 4, we asked to defer the consideration of this agenda item, despite we are completely aware that the issue under this agenda item will be dealt within SBI session. But as long as it's present in the agenda, COP26 agenda, we would ask to defer the consideration of this agenda item. Thank you.
So on item 4, reporting from review of parties included in Annex 1 to the Convention, Ukraine proposed to defer this item. Is this agreeable to parties? It is so decided. So hearing no further issues or objections, we will proceed on this basis. I now invite the COP to consider Agenda Item 2G, dates and venues of future sessions. In accordance with the practice of rotation amongst regional groups, the African states would host COP27, the Asia-Pacific states would host COP28, and Eastern European states would host COP29. The African states have nominated Egypt to host and serve as president of COP27. Early identification of a host country minimizes logistical and financial risks. I would therefore encourage the Asia-Pacific states and the Eastern European states to accelerate their consultations and propose a host for COP28 and COP29 respectively at the earliest possible time. The COP is also invited to agree on the dates for the sessional periods in 2025 to be recommended by the SBI. I propose that Janet Rogan of my delegation conduct consultations on my behalf with the relevant regional groups with a view to proposing a draft decision on this matter for adoption by the COP. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I would now like to invite the COP to consider Agenda Item 8, matters relating to finance, including sub-items A and C to F. I would like to introduce the sub-items and then open the floor for statements. After the statements, I will outline the overall approach in dealing with this agenda item. For sub-item 8A, long-term climate finance, COP25 could not conclude consideration, and in accordance with Rules 10C and 16 of the draft Rules of Procedures being applied, it has been included in the provisional agenda for this session. The COP is invited to deliberate on this matter and to consider the summary reports of the in-session workshops on long-term climate finance. Relevant information is contained in the documents FCCC/CP/2019/4, FCCC/CP/2019/7, FCCC/CP/2019/INF1, and FCCC/CP/2021/6. Regarding sub-item 8C, report of the Green Climate Fund to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Green Climate Fund, the COP is invited to provide guidance to the GCF on policies, programme priorities and eligibility criteria, taking into account the annual reports of the GCF contained in FCCC/CP/2020/5 and FCCC/CP/2021/8. The draft guidance to the operating entities of the financial mechanism proposed by the co-facilitators to the Standing Committee on Finance and compilation analysis of submissions received on the draft guidance outlined in the 2021 report of the SCF contained in FCCC/CP/2021/10/Addendum 3 to FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/7/Addendum 3. The annual reports on the operation of the NAMA registry contained in FCCC/CP/2020/INF1 and FCCC/CP/2021/INF1. I would like to thank Mr. Jose de Luna Martinez from Mexico and Mr. Jean-Christophe Donnellier from France for their leadership as co-chairs of the Green Climate Board and the members of the board for their hard work. For sub-item 8D, report of the Global Environment Facility to the Conference of the Parties and guidance to the Global Environment Facility, the COP will be invited to provide guidance on the GEF on policies, programme priorities and eligibility criteria, taking into consideration the annual reports of the GEF and its addendum contained in FCCC/CP/2020/1 and Addendum 1, and FCCC/CP/2021/9 and Addendum 1. The draft guidance to the operating entities of the financial mechanism proposed by the co-facilitators to the Standing Committee on Finance and compilation and analysis of submissions received on the draft guidance outlined in 2021 report of the SCF contained in FCCC/CP/2021/10 Addendum 3 to FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/7 Addendum 3. The annual reports on the operation of the NAMA registry contained in FCCC/CP/2020/1 and FCCC/CP/2021/1. I would like to thank the chairperson of the GF, Mr. Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, and the GF Secretariat for the work undertaken by the GF. For sub-item 8E, 7th review of the financial mechanism, the COP is invited to initiate and agree on the guidelines for the 7th review of the financial mechanism, taking into account the guidelines contained in the annex to decision 12/CP22. For sub-item 8F, compilation and synthesis of and summary report on the in-session workshop on biennial communications of information related to Article 9, Paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement, the COP is invited to consider the compilation and synthesis of the biennial communications and the summary report on the 2021 in-session workshop. Relevant information is contained in FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/3 and FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/5. I would now like to outline the approach for considering this agenda item. For sub-items 8A and 8F, I propose that Mr. Georg Borsting from Norway and Mr. Carlos Fuller from Belize co-chair the contact groups established for these sub-items. For sub-items 8C and D, I propose that Ambassador Diane Black-Lane from Antigua and Barbuda and Mr. Toru Sugio from Japan co-chair contact groups established for each sub-item. For sub-item 8E, I propose that Eva Schroeder from the Netherlands and Daniela Veas from Chile co-chair the contact group established for the sub-item. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the COP to consider agenda item 9, development and transfer of technologies, sub-item C, review of the constitution of the advisory board of the CGTN. The COP is invited to review the constitution of the advisory body of the CGTN, and I would propose that a contact group be established to undertake this review, co-chaired by Frederica Fricano from Italy and Marer Husni from Maldives. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the COP to consider agenda item 9, development and transfer of technologies, sub-item D, second review of the Climate Technology Centre and Network. The COP is invited to consider the findings of and recommendations arising from the second independent review and determine any follow-up action for enhancing the performance of the CGTN, and to consider matters relating to the renewal of the Memorandum of Understanding between the COP and UNEP regarding the hosting of the CTC, and determine any follow-up action. The report on the second independent review is contained in FCCC/CP/2021/3. I propose to establish informal consultations to consider these matters, co-chaired by Madeleine Diouf-Sarr from Senegal and Stephen Minas from Greece. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the COP to consider Agenda Item 18, Administrative, Financial and Institutional Matters, Sub-Item D, Decision-Making in the UNFCCC process. At COP25, parties were unable to conclude their consideration of this matter, and in accordance with the rules 10C and 16 of the draft rules of procedure being applied, this matter has been included in the provisional agenda for COP26. I propose to undertake informal consultations on sub-item 18D to be facilitated by Ken O'Flaherty of my delegation. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Delegates, this brings us to the end of the first meeting of the COP. I would now like to adjourn this meeting and open the CMP. This meeting of the COP is now adjourned. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I now declare open the 16th session of the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. We will now proceed with our work under Agenda Item 2, Organisational Matters. I invite the Conference to consider Sub-Item 2A of the Provisional Agenda, Adoption of the Agenda. With the understandings that I previously outlined in the first plenary meeting of the COP, I propose that the agenda be adopted as contained in document FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/1/Addendum 1. I call Ukraine to take the floor.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Distinguished delegates, the delegation of Ukraine carefully studied the documents under CMP 16 Agenda Item 4B, and in this regard I would like to make a statement. We note that these documents under this agenda, item 4B, failed to meet the concerns voiced at the previous COP25 session. Given the need to ensure a consistent application by the Secretariat of the agreed approach, the delegation of Ukraine stands for deferment of the consideration of CMP 16 Agenda Item 4B. Namely, we refer to the documents FCCC/KP/CMP/2019/6 and Addendum 1, FCCC/KP/CMP/2020/5 and Addendum 1, FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/3 and Addendum 1. We ask to include the statement in the report of CMP 16. So we ask to defer the consideration of Agenda Item 4B. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank Ukraine for their intervention, and I propose to defer discussion on this item to CMP 17. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Excellencies, I have heard your views, and hearing no further objections, it is so decided. I invite the conference to consider sub-item 2B of the agenda, election of additional officers. Under the Kyoto Protocol, if any member of the Bureau represents a state that is not a party to the Kyoto Protocol, elections will be held for an additional member representing a party to the protocol. Vice President Mr. Mohammed Irfan Tariq will continue conducting consultations on this matter. I propose to return to this item at the closing plenary of the CMP to conduct the election of additional Bureau members if necessary. Please be reminded that the deadline for nominations is 8 p.m. on Saturday, the 6th of November. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Distinguished delegates, I now invite the conference to consider sub-item 2C, organisation of work, including for the sessions of the subsidiary bodies. On the following items, the CMP will take appropriate action on the basis of recommendations from the subsidiary bodies. Sub-item 8A of item 4, reporting from and review of the parties included in Annex 1. Sub-item B of item 7, matters relating to the Adaptation Fund. Item 8, capacity building under the Kyoto Protocol. Item 9, report of the Forum on the impact of the implementation of response measures. Sub-items A, B, and C of item 12, administrative, financial, and institutional matters. These items are already on the agendas of the respective subsidiary body, and that body may develop draft decisions or conclusions for consideration by the CMP as appropriate. In addition, I propose to refer sub-agenda item 4C, date of completion of the expert review process under Article 8 of the Kyoto Protocol for the second commitment period, to the subsidiary body for implementation for consideration at its 56th session. I would ask that the SBI conclude its work with a view to recommending a draft decision for consideration and adoption no later than at CMP 17. During the COP plenary, I presented proposals for the organisation of work. As all parties of the protocol are also parties of the convention, I propose that the CMP follows the same approach as the COP. During the second week of the conference, I will reconvene the CMP to consider the decisions and conclusions for adoption. Hearing no objections, we will proceed on this basis. I now invite the CMP to consider agenda item 2E, status of ratification of the Doha Amendment to the Kyoto Protocol. On 8th of December 2021, at the 8th session of the Conference of the Parties, serving as a meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol, the parties adopted, in accordance with Articles 20 and 21 of the Kyoto Protocol, the Doha Amendment to the Kyoto Protocol. Distinguished colleagues, it is with great pleasure that I note that the Doha Amendment to the Kyoto Protocol entered into force on the 31st of December 2020. And as of the 30th of October 2021, 147 parties to the Kyoto Protocol have accepted the Doha Amendment. I congratulate these parties. I now invite the CMP to take note of this information. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMP to consider agenda item 4, reporting from and review of parties included in Annex 1, sub-item 4B, annual compilation and accounting report for the second commitment period for Annex B parties under the Kyoto Protocol. Parties may wish to refer to documents FCCC/KP/CMP/2019/6 and Addendum 1, FCCC/KP/CMP/2020/5 and Addendum 1, and FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/3 and Addendum 1. I would like to invite the CMP to take note of the information contained in the annual compilation and accounting reports for Annex B parties under the Kyoto Protocol for 2019, 2020 and 2021. Hearing no... I request Ukraine to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As already mentioned, the delegation of Ukraine asks to defer the consideration of this item 4B. Thank you.
Thank you to Ukraine. Apologies on behalf of the Secretariat. That item should have been deferred. So I now see that Solomon Islands wants to take the floor. I request the Solomon Islands to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We have a lot of sympathy for the concerns expressed by Ukraine with respect to this agenda item. We understand that they have concerns that some documentation relating to this agenda item may not be correct. Nevertheless, there is important information within these documents that is worthy of review, and it would be unfortunate if we deferred this issue. Perhaps you could hold informal consultations with parties on how to proceed with this, and in particular, the information that may be incorrect in the accompanying documents. But it would be a shame to allow this agenda item to just disappear or deferred. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I acknowledge the concerns. As all parties will note, the agenda was adopted and the deferred and agenda item 4 was deferred, but of course this will be considered under the SPI. Hearing no further objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMP to consider agenda item 5, matters relating to the Clean Development Mechanism. Parties may wish to refer to documents FCCC/KP/CMP/2020/1 and FCCC/KP/CMP/2021-4. Since the publication of the annual report, the Executive Board met in Glasgow last week, and the meeting report is available on the CDM web pages of the UNFCCC website. I would like to thank the Chair of the Executive Board of the CDM for 2021, Mr. Olivier Cassi of Belgium, and the Chair for 2020, Mr. El Hadji Mabaye Diandne of Senegal, for their leadership, and the members and alternative members of the board for their hard work. I would propose to establish a contact group to consider this item to be co-chaired by Mr. Kazuhisa Kutsu from Japan and Mr. Yor Safo from Ghana. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I am aware that some of the issues relating to CDM that will be discussed in this contact group are challenging politically in nature, and some are linked to matters relating to Article 6 under the Paris Agreement, currently being addressed under the subster. I intend to maintain close contact with the co-chairs of this item in order to ensure smooth and coordinated progress across the subster of the CMA and the CMP. I will be listening carefully to parties to identify whether and when it may become necessary for the Presidency to undertake consultations on any matters relating to the CDM, including at the ministerial level, given the issues and their linkages to Article 6. Elections of the members and alternate members of the CDM Executive Board will be conducted during the closing CMP plenary. I now invite the CMP to consider agenda item 6, matters relating to joint implementation. Parties may wish to refer to documents FCCC/KP/CMP/2020/4 and FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/6. I would like to thank the Chair of the Joint Implementation Supervisory Committee for 2021, Mr. Derek Odison of Barbados, and the Chair for 2020, Ms. Vanessa Leonardi of Italy, for their leadership, and the members and alternative members of the JISC for their hard work. Dear colleagues, I would like to propose that the CMP takes note of the annual reports of the JISC. I would also propose that the CMP expresses its appreciation to the JISC for its prudent management of resources during the past 2 years. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Election of the members and alternative members of the JISC will be conducted during the closing CMP plenary. I now invite the CMP to consider Agenda Item 7A, matters relating to the Adaptation Fund, report of the Adaptation Fund Board for 2020 and 2021. Parties may wish to refer to documents FCCC/KP/CMP/2020/2 to FCCC/PA/CMA/2020/2 and FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/2 to FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/4 and Addendum 1. I would like to thank the Chair of the Adaptation Fund Board, Mr. Matthias Broman from Sweden, and the members and alternate members of the board for their hard work. I propose to establish a contact group to consider this item to be co-chaired by Mr. Ali Waqas Malik from Pakistan and Ms. Claudia Keller from Germany. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Elections of the members and alternative members of the Adaptation Fund Board will be conducted during the closing CMP plenary. I now invite the CMP to consider Agenda Item 10, Report of the Compliance Committee. Parties may wish to refer to documents FCCC/KP/CMP/2020/3 and FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/5. I would like to thank the chairpersons of the committee, Mr. Mamadou Diobi Gaia from Senegal and Mr. Milan Zvara from Slovakia for their leadership, and the members and alternative members for their hard work. I would like to propose that the CMP takes note of the reports of the Compliance Committee. I also propose that the CMP invites parties to make contributions to the Trust Fund for supplementary activities to support the work of the Compliance Committee in biennium 2022 to 2023. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Election of the members and alternative members of both branches of the Compliance Committee will be conducted during the closing CMP plenary. I now invite the CMP to consider Agenda Item 11, Report on the High-Level Ministerial Roundtable on Increased Ambition of Kyoto Protocol Commitments. Consultations during CMP 15 on this matter reveal that views remain divergent on whether further work is needed under this agenda item. As parties were unable to conclude consideration on this matter, it has been included in the provisional agenda for CMP 16 in accordance with Rules 10C and Rule 16 of the draft rules of the procedure being applied. I propose to undertake consultations to be facilitated by David Moran of my delegation. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Delegates, this brings us to the end of the first meeting of the CMP. I would now like to adjourn this meeting and open the CMA. This meeting of the CMP is now adjourned. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I now declare open the third session of the Conference of the Parties, serving as a meeting of the parties to the Paris Agreement. We will now proceed with our work under Agenda Item 2, Organisational Matters. I invite the conference to consider sub-item 2A of the Provisional Agenda, Adoption of the Agenda. With the understandings that I previously outlined in the first plenary meeting of the COP, I propose that the agenda be adopted as contained in document FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/1/Addendum 2. I see that Venezuela has requested the floor. Venezuela, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to make the same observation that I made for the agenda of the COP. If you can put in the register that Venezuela raised the issue regarding the necessity of having a space for the discussion of all the issues that are external elements, collateral affectation to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that intervention. We will address the concerns as under the COP. I see that Timor-Leste has requested the floor. Timor-Leste, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks once again for giving me the floor. I would like to repeat what I have said when you opened the COP agenda item just a while ago. We do believe that the work done under the agenda item 7 of CMA will be reported back to both COP and also CMA. We do see that it will be facilitated by the SBI and SABSTA, but outcome of this consultation will be reported to both COP and also CMA. Thank you very much, and we support to adopt the agenda item.
Thank you for that. I acknowledge the concerns and, of course, will be addressed as outlined under the COP. So, Excellencies, delegates, I have heard your views, and hearing no further objections, it is so decided. Consultations to be undertaken by the senior member of my delegation on Agenda Item 7, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impacts, will be held jointly with the consultations on COP Agenda Item 7. Similarly, consultations to be held on sub-agenda item 8A, matters relating to the Standing Committee on Finance, will be held jointly with consultations on COP agenda item 8B. Further, I will appoint senior members of my delegation to consult on the special needs and special circumstances of Africa and on the reporting and review pursuant to Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, provision of financial and capacity building support to developing countries. I will keep parties informed on the progress of the consultations. I invite the conference to consider sub-item 2B of the agenda, election of additional officers. Under the Paris Agreement, if any member of the Bureau represents a state that is not a party to the Paris Agreement, elections will be held for an additional member representing a party to the Paris Agreement. Vice President Mr. Mohamed Irfan Tariq will continue conducting consultations on this matter. I propose a return to this item at the closing plenary of the CMP to conduct the election of additional Bureau members if necessary. Please be reminded that the deadline for nominations is 8 p.m. on Saturday the 6th of November. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the conference to consider sub-item 2C, organisation of work, including the sessions of the subsidiary bodies. On the following items, the CMA will take appropriate action on the basis of recommendations from the subsidiary bodies. Sub-items A and B of item 4, matters related to adaptation. Item 5, methodological issues relating to the enhanced transparency framework for action and support referred to in Article 13 of the Paris Agreement. Item 7, Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage associated with climate change impacts. Sub-items A and B of item 9, development and transfer of technologies. Item 10, capacity building under the Paris Agreement. Item 11, report of the Forum on the impact of the implementation of response measures. Item 12, matters relating to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Sub-items A, B and C of item 14, administrative, financial and institutional matters. These items are already on the agendas of the respective subsidiary body, and that body may develop draft decisions or conclusions for consideration by the CMA as appropriate. In relation to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, informal ministerial level work has been ongoing since July, guided by Minister Grace Fu of Singapore and former Minister Sveinung Rotevatn of Norway. It is my understanding that some aspects of the decisions for Article 6 in the Subster may require presidency consultations after the Subster, and I'm pleased that Minister Grace Fu of Singapore and Minister Espen Barth Eide of Norway have agreed to be ready to lead that ministerial engagement. I'm also aware that there may be related aspects under the item 6 of the CMP agenda relating to the CDM, and I would like to reassure parties that I will ensure smooth coordination amongst the different processes dealing with these matters. During the COP plenary, I presented proposals for the organisation of work. As all parties to the agreement are also parties to the convention, I propose that the CMA follows the same approach as the COP. Distinguished delegates, I would like to take this opportunity to draw parties' attention to documents FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/8, Addendum 1 to 3, and Rev 1, nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. These synthesis reports respond to the requests in paragraph 25 of Decision 1/CP21 and paragraph 10 of Decision 1/CMA2, where the Secretariat was requested to prepare a synthesis report and to make it available to this session. The synthesis reports, which are available on the UNFCCC website, aim to facilitate clarity, transparency and understanding of nationally determined contributions and can serve as useful inputs to your deliberations here in Glasgow. During the second week of the conference, we will reconvene the CMA to consider the decisions and conclusions for adoption. Hearing no objections, we will proceed on this basis. I now invite the CMA to consider Agenda Item 2E, Status of Ratification of the Paris Agreement. As of 30th October 2021, 192 parties to the Convention have ratified the Paris Agreement. The most recent ratification was received from Turkey on the 11th of October, and Turkey will become a party to the Paris Agreement on the 10th of November 2021. I congratulate these parties and encourage other parties to ratify the Paris Agreement as soon as possible. I now invite the CMA to take note of this information and invite parties to the Convention to expedite their ratification. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMA to consider Agenda Item 2E, Status of Ratification of the Paris Agreement. As of 30th October, apologies. Let me restart. I now invite the CMA to consider Agenda Item 6A, modalities and procedures for the operation and use of a public registry referred to in Article 4, paragraph 12 of the Paris Agreement. Parties may recall that CMA 1.3 adopted the modalities and procedures for the operation and use of the public registry referred to in Article 4, paragraph 12 of the Paris Agreement. The CMA is invited to consider and conclude whether the prototype of the public registry developed by the Secretariat conforms to the modalities and procedures for the operation and use of the public registry referred to in Article 4, paragraph 12 of the Paris Agreement. CMA 2 did not complete consideration of this matter. In accordance with Rules 10C and 16 of the draft Rules of Procedure being applied, this sub-item has been included in the provisional agenda for this session. I propose to establish a contact group to be co-chaired by Ms. Emily Masawa from Kenya and Mr. Peter Wittock from Belgium. Sorry, may I ask, does any party seek the floor? Okay, well, hearing no objections, it is... Oh. Saudi Arabia seeks the floor. Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. President, congratulations on your appointment as a President for COP26. We look forward to working with you. Mr. President, I just wanted to tell you that you're going too fast on us, Mr. President. We're hardly able to catch up with the progress and the gaveling on the work that you're proposing. Good example of that, you just spoke about the synthesis report earlier that will be done by the Secretariat on the NDCs, and then you followed to say that you're going to propose decisions as a result of that. I wish to ask you, where was the mandate for you, Mr. President, to propose decisions for that? Perhaps I'm missing something, we're missing something. We want to make sure that whatever you're proposing is consistent with the previous COP decisions. The paragraph 25 of 1CP 21 does not suggest that we would take decisions. It just asks the Secretariat to put together the census report. It is up to us as parties at some point of time if we feel the need for decisions to be taken. But the way you propose it, Mr. President, that you are determined upfront to take decisions of which we're not clear of. So I would seek your clearance, your clarification on this before we move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that comment, and I apologize if we're going a little fast, but I would just refer again to what I said, which was that during the second week of the conference, we will reconvene the CMA to consider decisions and conclusions for adoption under the CMA. I hope that clarifies that point.
Mr. President, thank you so much, but that has no relation to the synthesis report that will be produced by the Secretariat. Are we all clear on that? You're not linking those considerations to the synthesis report that will be issued, perhaps the updated one by the Secretariat. We're open for considering decisions as we need to, but not to link it to the census report for the NDCs, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Sorry, please forgive me. We just want to consult for a minute. Sorry, if I can just confirm that, that the matter was not connected to the NDC synthesis report, but in fact refers to the totality of the work of the CMA. I was merely doing reference to the work programme that we have. I hope that clarifies the matter. So, colleagues, I'm now going to go back to agenda item 6A, which I spoke about earlier, and seeing that there are no further objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMA to consider agenda item 6B, modalities and procedures for the operation and use of a public registry referred to in Article 7, paragraph 12 of the Paris Agreement. Parties may recall that CMA 1.3 decided to establish the public registry for adaptation communication referred to in Article 7, paragraph 12 of the Paris Agreement to contain adaptation communications submitted by parties in accordance with Article 7, paragraph 11 of the Paris Agreement. CMA 1.3 also decided to adopt the modalities and procedures for the operation and use of the public registry. The CMA is invited to consider and conclude whether the prototype of the public registry developed in accordance with the modalities and procedures for the operation and use of the public registry shall serve as the public registry referred to in Article 7, paragraph 12 of the Paris Agreement. CMA 2 did not complete consideration of this matter. In accordance with Rules 10C and 16 of the draft Rules of Procedure being applied, this item has been included in the provisional agenda for this session. I propose to establish a contact group to be co-chaired by Ms. Emily Masawa from Kenya and Mr. Peter Wittek from Belgium. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the CMA to consider agenda item 8, matters relating to finance, including sub-items B to F. I would like to introduce all the sub-items, and then I will outline the overall approach in dealing with this agenda item. Regarding sub-item 8B, guidance to the Green Climate Fund, the CMA is invited to provide guidance to GCF on policies, programme priorities and eligibility criteria related to the Paris Agreement for transmission by the COP. Relevant information is contained in documents FCCC/CP/2020/5, FCCC/CP/2021/8, and FCCC/CP/2021/10, Addendum 3, through to FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/7, Addendum 3. Regarding sub-item 8C, guidance to the Global Environment Facility, the CMA is invited to provide guidance to the GF on policies, programme priorities and eligibility criteria related to the Paris Agreement for transmission by the COP. Relevant information is contained in documents FCCC/CP/2020/1 and Addendum 1, FCCC/CP/2021/9 and Addendum 1, FCCC/CP/2021/10, Addendum 3 to FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/7, Addendum 3. Regarding sub-item 8D, matters relating to the Adaptation Fund, the CMA is invited to provide guidance to the Adaptation Fund Board and to consider any recommendations from the CMP. Relevant information is contained in documents FCCC/KP/CMP/2020/2 to FCCC/PA/CMA/2020/2 and FCCC/KP/CMP/2021/2 to FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/4 and Addendum 1. Regarding sub-item 8E, new collective quantified goal on climate finance, the CMA is invited to initiate deliberations on the new collective quantified goal. Regarding sub-item 8F, compilation and synthesis of and summary report on the in-session workshop on biennial communications of information related to Article 9, Paragraph 5 of the Paris Agreement. The CMA is invited to consider the compilation and synthesis of biennial communications and the summary report on the 2021 in-session workshop. Relevant information is contained in the FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/3 and FCCC/PA/CMA/2021/5. I would now like to outline the approach for considering these agenda sub-items. Item 8B and 8C will be undertaken in the contact group established for COP agenda item 8C and D, co-chaired by Ambassador Diane Black-Lane from Antigua and Barbuda and Mr. Toru Sugio from Japan. Item 8D will be undertaken in the contact group established for the CMP agenda item 7A, co-chaired by Mr. Ali Waqas Malik from Pakistan and Ms. Claudia Keller from Germany. For sub-item 8E, I propose that Ms. Uti Honkatukia from Finland and Mr. Zahir Fakir from Egypt co-chair the contact group established for the sub-item. Sub-item 8F will be undertaken in the contact group established for the COP agenda item 8F, co-chaired by Mr. Georg Borsting from Norway and Mr. Carlos Fuller from Belize. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. I now invite the conference to consider sub-item 9C of the agenda. First, periodic assessment referred to in paragraph 69 of decision 1/CP21. The CMA1 adopted the scope and the modalities for the periodic assessment of the effectiveness and adequacy of the support provided to the technology mechanism in supporting the implementation of the Paris Agreement on matters relating to technology development and transfer. The CMA1 also decided to initiate the first periodic assessment in 2021 in accordance with the scope and modalities in the annex to decision 16/CMA1 with a view to completing the first periodic assessment in 2022. The CMA is invited to initiate the first periodic assessment. I propose to establish an informal consultation to consider this item to be co-chaired by Gabriela Fischerova from Slovakia and Ms. Dudi Zila Ngetwa Masina from Eswatini. Hearing no objections, it is so decided. Delegates, this brings us to the end of our first meeting of the CMA. Before I adjourn this meeting, I would like to pay special tribute to our partners for COP26, Italy, and their hosting of the pre-COP in Milan. The meeting of the CMA is now adjourned.
Well done. It's a marathon, huh?
Yeah, so